Welcome back to our video lecture series. Today we're going to look at chronic viral infections. Now there are a lot of ways you can look at this, and some of this is going to be also meant to include regular viral infections, but we want to look at some of our stronger antivirals specifically. We're going to do another one in this module looking at bacterial and kind of simultaneously some fungal infections. So between these two videos, we should be able to get a pretty good rounded out picture of the herbs we use generally as antimicrobials. In fact, as we've talked about before, one of the ways to start to frame the overarching actions that we use in botanical medicine really are to say adaptogens, alteratives, and antimicrobials. Antimicrobials, obviously, as the name suggests, are used for infection, and we're going to largely see them in that context. So let's start to take a look at some of our antivirals. We've chosen to do as a case here what actually is going to be a hepatitis case. Now, originally when this lecture was actually put together, hepatitis, this is Hep B, Hep C, the improvements in Hep treatment have vastly advanced, and now I'm not exactly sure the status of how that's covered, but Hep C is considered much more treatable than it was back then. When this was first put together several years ago, the Hep C case that I used to use was actually a real case that I would use as an example of a patient who actually was refractory to a couple rounds of interferon. So to simplify here, we've used Hep B, and we've made it chronic Hep B. So this gives us a bit of a way to explore some of the herbs that we're going to use, but don't get too attached to the hepatitis part. Think mostly of this lecture as a way to explore viral infections broadly. We'll actually probably spend more than some of our other sections time actually looking at our herbs. We're going to look at some that are more broad. We'll see more of those in the chronic sinusitis, I think, is what we'll use to see there. And we're going to see some, like in this section, that are particularly antiviral. And I'm kind of putting some check marks here. These are some of the ones that are especially antiviral. I would personally check cedar as well. Echinacea, I'm going to move a little squiggly here. We think this one's a good antiviral. It might be an excellent antiviral. We actually don't fully understand how echinacea works, and we hopefully will find out, but we do know it has efficacy in treating at least colds and flus. Chronic viral infections, probably not as much. Okay, so we've got a lot of the standard things that we would look at over here. There's not really too much to highlight. We've got a progressive viral infection. The TCM integration part is probably where I want to spend a little bit of time. So this is going to be pathogenic factor. This is actually quite important here. Chronic infections are pathogenic factors invading and lodging in the interior. And we won't do this in this lecture series, but one of my favorite lectures to do overall is actually the one where we look at ME, fibromyalgia, what people are calling Lyme right now, and we actually specifically take a broad step back and look at it from a TCM perspective, where we talk about a pathogen or a pathogenic factor becoming lodged in the interior. So when we talk about a chronic viral infection here, we are talking about something that has progressed from the exterior and is now in the interior, but unlike those more, well, I mean, this is obviously a very serious case if it's active Hep B, those conditions would be even further in the interior. So here, there are a lot of different patterns that we can look at. Obviously, if we are talking about hepatitis, we're going to have heat in the liver. It is indeed going to be damp heat, and almost always at this point we call it toxic heat. Now, that doesn't have to be the case for all chronic infections, but ones that have a fulminant version. So any chronic infection, something like malaria, for example, would also be a toxic presentation. We start to use that word there. Here we're going to clear liver heat, we're going to drain dampness, we're going to nourish liver, spleen, and the Wei Qi. Now, we've talked before in a couple different places also about the Zhang Qi, which is Wei plus Jing. So that, of course, equals kidneys as well. So that will play a role. Obviously, a chronic infection is going to wear down someone's, it doesn't matter if we use TCM or not here, someone's resilience. A popular word right now, it's one I really like. So a chronic infection will wear down someone's Jing, will wear down someone's resilience, will start to overburden, or at least tax, their nervous system and their adrenals. So that's a little bit how we want to look at this as a presentation. Now, what we want to look at next, of course, are our outcomes and our actions. As usual with the outcomes, nothing too special here. Obviously, we want to resolve or manage an infection. We do, want to improve ADL if it is an active infection. This is, the less significant the infection, less important this becomes. Increased ability to work, same thing. Resolve or manage infection. Usually, that's going to be decrease the symptoms and decrease duration. Almost always when we're dealing with infections, we want to also decrease the frequency. So these are usually three of our variables that we can track, often objectively, to some degree at least, in any infectious, particularly recurrent or chronic: the severity of symptoms, the duration of symptoms, and the frequency of symptoms. So if we were using it in our HEP case here, it would be less frequent outbreaks, shorter periods during, I shouldn't say outbreaks, you might call them bouts, and less severe symptoms over here and shorter durations overall. So in any viral presentation, obviously antiviral is going to be a big action that we would use here, of course. Now here's where, like we've seen in a lot of places, your secondary actions obviously are up to you and others to consider. Same thing. We're not really going to see too much in terms of our others to consider here, but our secondary actions are to what degree, in this case, do you use an immune stimulant, to what degree will you use an adaptogen, and to what degree will you use an alterative. Adaptogens obviously are going to be used to improve resilience. ... And immune stimulant, this one's pretty self-evident, so we want to upregulate the immune function. Now, alterative, you might be saying, well, why have we got an alterative in there? The more chronic a condition, really the more damage it does, either directly from the infection or as sequelae or consequence from that infection. So alterative is a way of trying to improve, I'm going to say improve repair, but it might be more accurate to actually say improve clearance. If there's a lot of inflammation that's generated, we want to help the body clear and move that through smoothly. Now, we don't necessarily have to add specifically something in here as an alterative. We can probably, through our other herbs, have an alterative action, but you might find that if they don't, you actually choose to use a little bit of an extra. Now, alterative here, of course, these are probably going to be diphoretics. And that certainly we can add very easily. So we're going to release the exterior and promote sweating. These, of course, can also be diuretics. And we might see that, especially if there's a lot of dampness. We could also consider laxatives. And now in this particular case where we said toxic heat, this one would actually be a star for this case. It's not always a star, but it's a star for this case because it will clear toxic heat. If you want to clear toxic heat from the body, if you want to clear heat from the liver, you use laxatives. That's what laxatives do. Big part. It's not the only thing, of course, but a big part of what they do. Okay, let's take a look further at, we'll start to mention some of our actions and we'll highlight some of our herbs. We're going to see these, of course, again when we highlight our herbs from this section. There are quite a few. And one of the nice things about botanical medicines, we really do have a pretty rich collection of herbs that are indeed antiviral. And not all of them are broad antimicrobials. There are some herbs that we use kind of across the board. And this one is probably the best. This would probably be, if we were to say we have a broad spectrum antimicrobial, the best one I would say is probably going to be our golden seal. Broad antimicrobial. Now, it's not, oh yeah, it is, good. Clove would be the next one. I would suggest that clove and hydrastis are best and strongest broad antimicrobials. Do I use them in viral infections? Absolutely, pretty regularly, in fact. They are strong. It's almost as simple as that. They're strong antimicrobials, and you can use them in pretty much every case. Some of the other ones that we're going to see here are more specifically antiviral. Let's actually see if we can highlight some of those. I would suggest these two. I'm going to use my box tool here. These two, Good antivirals. These two also, now cedar definitely has some broad spectrum action, but I personally use it almost exclusively in viral infections. I will use it occasionally in UTIs, but that's where I often use it. Here's another one, St. John's wort. Also fairly specifically an antiviral, and I'm going to lightly suggest our Lariat tridentata chaparral. It's actually not a herb that's used commonly at all. In fact, I can't remember. I'm not sure I've ever used it. It has, and I don't think we get a lot of requests for it either, but it does have a history of use, particularly in the North American Western botanical tradition. So I'll leave it on there, and it's in this box really to say, here's a herb you might not have heard of, you might not come across, but it does have a history of use in treating viral infections. Another one that definitely belongs in here is Osha, but Osha, I would say, also probably has an action a little more similar to golden seal. It is definitely a deep acting antimicrobial. So I'll highlight those right now as well and put little stars between or beside some of the deep antimicrobials. This won't be specific to viral, but let's put little stars beside them. Baptisia, definitely, and this one is in our antiviral box. Same thing, Lomatium. I would suggest this one. From what I know of it, this is a bit of I have to go less on experience and more on what we know, but I am going to include it over here. Golden seal, definitely, and I would say Osha for sure. Osha's particular keynote is usually deep lung infections. And when I say deep lung infections, I mean pneumonia, chronic bronchitis, pretty much anything that goes beyond your common upper respiratory tract infection. And I haven't starred clove here. It's actually, I don't know that I could call it, what does that even mean, deep antimicrobial? What I kind of reserve it for are infections that have moved deeper. I would say clove, that might be true if it's in the GI, but I don't know that it's true more broadly. So this one I like for GI infections, but I also like it across the board in upper respiratory tract infections as well. So that's a quick overview of some of the herbs that we're going to see here, but like I said, this section will be a little longer. We will go through pretty much every herb in this section as we do our review on herbs at the end of this particular section. Okay, now we get into the immune stimulants, and we'll review these. We'll probably review these less because we've seen these in a few other places. These are kind of our, obviously our keynote herbs for this section. I used to draw this little sign for a key in my notes. Looked a little nicer back then. I think my artistic skills have gone down somewhat. Let's just get rid of that one. Let's look at our immune stimulants. We've seen these before. Astragalus, this one always shows up, and Panax-Q, this one always shows up. These ones, we're pretty confident in their ability to stimulate the immune system. Even some of the research, I think more so in cancer, has shown that. Panax ginseng, likewise, pretty good. These ones we feel confident about. Cat's claw, we're starting to build a case for. I suspect we will find this one joins the group, and that's why it's here rather than... Well, it doesn't usually go in the antiviral category, but it often goes in an antimicrobial, sometimes antifungal category, and then other times also anti-inflammatory. So cat's claw, we're going to leave it in here for this section. And one you might be wondering about is echinacea. Does this belong down here? I'm going to put a question mark there. Because, does it? We're not sure. Probably it has, like we said a moment ago, it has probable benefit in treating at least common upper respiratory tract infections. We're not exactly sure. Is it an immune stimulant? Is it an antiviral? Is it even both? Who knows? Hopefully research will form some more concrete opinion, but as far as we currently know, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm down on echinacea. I just kind of wish we knew a little more about it. I do use it in formulas. Okay, we haven't mentioned licorice specifically, but this is a great antiviral. Underrated. It's an adaptogen. It's listed here as an adaptogen, but underrated as an antiviral. We'll see that perhaps in our next section. So we'll end it there for our overview of the condition and of the actions.